For my most loving pranams, the divine lotus feet for most beloved Swami. Brothers and sisters, Sai Ram to all of you. By Swami's immense grace, today we have Dr. Venkat Sadanand, who has flown in from California to be with us this weekend and share Swami's divine love with all of us. Dr. Venkat Sadanand serves as a director of rotations at Swami's Super Speciality Hospital in Whitefield and Prashanthi Nilayam. He also is a member of the International Medical Committee of the Sri Sathya Sai organization. His career path has taken a very unique course thanks to our beloved Swami's divine guidance as well as his implicit obedience to follow Swami's divine command. He was a very accomplished professor in economics, worked at NASA after completing his PhD in economics. But one fine day, Swami asked him to become a medical doctor, and that too specializing in brain surgery. So following Swami's divine command, he became a neurosurgeon from the University of Toronto in Canada, and then went on to receive his fellowship in pediatric neurosurgery. But he was always interested in knowing the unknown. And his spiritual quest really started when he was a young boy in school. He has read the scriptures and has followed the teachings and the message of many sages, saints, and holy men. He has also worked with Mother Teresa. And finally, he came to our beloved Swami's divine lotus feet. In fact, very coincidentally, when he went to Mother Teresa, she initiated him on the spiritual path with the words, remember 3 words, just love God. And when he went to our beloved Swami, our omniscient Swami repeated those same words to him, remember 3 words, just love God. And he took this message to heart and allowed this love to express itself as service. He's been instrumental in conducting medical camps in Prashanthi Nilayam twice a year. In fact, he just returned after serving for 2 months in the Super Speciality Hospital in Whitefield. He also served the tsunami victims in Sri Lanka a few months back. And I request you to join me in giving a very loving welcome to this very distinguished messenger of our beloved Swami.
Sai Ram, my most humble pranams to the divine lotus feet of my very, very beloved Bhagavan Sri Sathya Sai Baba. And may he guide me as we have this satsang today. I'm very grateful to the elders of this Sathya Sai Center and to Sundar for giving me the opportunity to come here and have satsang. Our love for God only grows. It keeps growing with every satsang that we have. And I'm grateful to you for giving me this opportunity. The bhajans today were beautiful, as they say, soul-stirring. And every bhajan was a prayer, a heartfelt prayer. And that's what made it soul-stirring. The topic listed in your website was Divine Communion with Swami through prayers. The universal prayer at the end, which Swami himself guided us, Om Bhur Bhuvaswaha Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Swami has said in one of his discourses that this prayer is referred to as the universal prayer because it contains three aspects of what every prayer should contain. Every prayer should have three parts to it. Otherwise, it's incomplete. The first part is praising the Lord. Savitur or Savita is the one from which everything originates. That is an enormous praise, and we will come to that. The second aspect of a prayer is meditation, where you focus your thoughts on this divine entity and ponder its magnitude, and with gratitude you sink into this entity. So that is the second part every prayer should have, meditation. The third part, Swami says, has to be our conversation, sambhashan with Swami. So there we have a conversation. Now, sometimes prayers filter down to just the third part. And we talk to Swami and say, Swami, I want this or I want that. In most instances, those are not prayers. And this is from Swami's own discourse in 1989 in Vrindavan. You must have these three aspects in the prayer. And so every prayer you have to think about how you can incorporate these three aspects. So let's take the first part, the part about praise for the Lord. The one from which everything originates. If you think about it, that is mind-boggling. It's beyond our thought. In fact, it goes beyond thought to experience. That is perhaps the only way to understand the origin of everything. And some of you may know this already, but one of the most astounding, for me at least, very touching discourse of Swami was from 1990, again in Vrindavan. And he talks about the origin of the universe. Now, there is the scientific side of how the universe originated. We have, the Big Bang theory, and we have all these other things. The physicists and the cosmologists come and tell us about how the universe began. But Swami's understanding and rendition of how the universe was created is completely different. It's a different algebra. It's a different way of thinking that Swami says we cannot really understand, but he's trying to put it across with analogies. So he says there are three gunas, right? So there is sattvic, rajasic, tamasic. And there are 5 elements. And these 5 elements, space, air, water, fire, earth. And these 5 elements interact with the 3 gunas to create the universe. And it does it in a way by using permutations and combination. Now imagine this is coming from someone who, as a physical human being, doesn't have much education. How we mix these creates an entity, creates this universe. If you go back to the physicist's way of thinking about the universe, and I'm still dwelling on the first part, which is praising the Lord in a prayer. If you think about the physicist's way of creation of the universe, the Big Bang started it all. And in that fraction of a moment, when time was created, that's the origin of time, all we had were those tiny little particles which coalesced and interacted, and eventually we got hydrogen, we got a proton, and then from that we went to helium, and then more interactions, lithium, and so on, and the entire periodic table. And then those atoms started joining, and you had molecules. And this Big Bang had so much energy, everything was expanding. So the physicist's way of looking at the universe is one where the conclusion is not different from what Swami has been telling us. That we all originate from the same source, because there was nothing else before that origin of the Big Bang. And then we had those little molecules, the atoms, the molecules, the particles, matter, energy. And so you didn't exist, I didn't exist prior to that. And now we exist. And the only particles that make us up came from that Big Bang. There was nothing else as far as the physicist is concerned. So the physicist eventually comes down to the same fundamental understanding that we are all created of the same stone, of the same origin, of the same divine entity. Now Swami says there is something more than that. To say that we are all created of the same entity as viewed by the scientific world refers only to our physical part. But there is more to us. There is the divine part of us. So how does the physicist talk about that? They don't. So Swami says, I can tell you a way of understanding the creation of the universe, and this is actually from the Upanishads, and he says, this way of understanding the universe will make you understand both the divine and the physical part of everything that you see around you. So of the three gunas, take one of them. I'll just give you a couple of examples. You take sattvic, sattva, and when a certain portion of that sattva interacts with space, those are the 5 elements, right? Space. You get the ear. You know, this is mind-boggling. And that's what Swami says. You won't understand, just listen. This is what Swami says. So he says that's how you get the ear. And when sattvic or sattva interacts with air, you get skin. And when sattva interacts with water, you get tongue. When sattva mixes with fire, you get eyes. So each organ that takes in, right, the ear hears, the skin feels, the eyes see. So whatever you take in, the origin of that is sattvic. And the proportion matters. Some people can hear better, some people can hear less, some people can see better, some animals can see better, and so on. So this proportion changes everything. And this is for living beings, and there's entire algebra for non-living beings. That is sattvic. What does rajasic do? When rajasic interacts with space, you get speech. When rajasic interacts with air, you get hand. And so the organs that are created by the interaction of rajasic with the elements produces the output. The speech produces something that you can hear with your ear. So rajasic gives you an ability to go from you to outside you, comes out. Same thing with the hand. When something crawls in your skin, you do this, you get rid of it. So this has the ability to throw things out. So rajasic has the ability to create things that by our nature goes from within to without, pushes it out. Sattvic, by its very nature, has the ability to create things in us that goes from outside to inside. Unfortunately, Swami says, we live our lives in the exact opposite way. We imbibe, we take in rajasic, and we throw out what is sattvic. And that is a tragedy. It denies our human life. It denies who we are and how we are created. And in all our worship, if we step back and think about who we are, then we would never do that, because that is not us. That is not in our true nature. Now, scientists tell us things, one thing today, Newtonian physics got overthrown the next day, a few years or a few decades or a few centuries, it's overthrown by somebody else. And then it's overthrown by someone else, and so on. That's how we evolve. But truth doesn't evolve, it exists. And this is why Swami says that it is important for us to understand the truth. And that understanding comes from experience. If we live our lives according to the laws of nature, by what created us, then we would live a different life. We would not be engaging in wars, we would not be engaging in abuse, we would not be engaging in gossip, we would not be engaging in useless activities. We would conserve our energy to take in what is sattvic and to throw out what is rajasic and so on. So that is true existence of us. So when you think about the glory of God in your prayer, the first part of prayer, that glory is enormous. It is beyond our understanding. I mean, I really cannot understand this algebra. And then Swami even talks in this discourse about Panchikritam, which is the permutations and combinations that make us part of every element. And the proportion of each element that we take in, that created us, defines us. And he talks about that. He gives a beautiful analogy of how people can exchange money. It's just beautiful. And sometime, later on, if we have time, we can talk about it. But the essence of creation comes from a wonderful combination and permutation of gunas and elements. And that's why we are divine, because we are created by the 5 elements. And each of us has every part of the 5 elements. And each of us has a mind that gives us the ability to discriminate. And that's the last sentence in that universal prayer. So we have the ability to discriminate. We are created by the 5 elements. The 5 elements exist all around us. And these give us the quality that makes us divine, because divinity has exactly the same qualities. The proportions may vary, but exactly the same qualities. And so we are no different. We truly are no different. And so this view of God is baffling. Think about what this means. Today we sit here and we talk about, Swami, please make sure I get this job, or make sure my child gets married, or whatever wishes we have, or we praise the Lord and His beautiful eyes and His beautiful feet. But think about, put it in perspective, okay? The Earth is a small part of the solar system. We are within that, in one part of the Earth. So if you rise above the Earth and you try to look at where we are tiny dots. And that's a small part of the solar system, which is a small part of the Milky Way, which is a small part of the universe. And to give you an idea of proportions, if you think of the Milky Way, our galaxy where we exist, as about 100 meters on the beach, our solar system is less than a millimeter. There are over, close to 400 billion stars in this Milky Way. The nearest galaxy to us is far, far, far away, farther than we can imagine. And that galaxy, Andromeda, has 1 trillion stars. These are mind-boggling numbers for us. But what we believe as our greatness is truly nothing. So we have to pause and put ourselves down. Put yourself down as humans so that you as divine may rise. That you're a president or a prime minister or whatever you are is you as a human. Put that down. Because in perspective, you are truly nothing. But the divine in you, the divinity, is truly great. That divinity within you is what created this universe, which is enormous. And, with our eyes, what we see, it's like a cone that comes out, and you can see all this and you think, oh, I'm great. Look at yourself from outside and you'll see how small you are. So put that ego down. There was a beautiful little note outside this temple. I think it's downstairs. Keep your slippers and ego out. And that's so true, because that destroys us. It destroys us by not letting us see who we really are. So the first part of prayer is this praise. And part of this praise is to understand our praise itself. It is not sufficient to just say, God, you're great. It is not sufficient to say that you are the creator of the universe, but think immediately about what that means. Think about the magnitude, the difference between you as the divine and you as the human. It's just ridiculous. It's, as I said, it's less than a millimeter. It's the entire solar system. In that, there is some little tiny dot, and in that dot, there are two of us over here, and I'm talking in this place, compared to the universe, which is billions of 100-meter surfaces. Just doesn't compare. So that's how you pray. So every prayer that you pray should have that as the first component. The second component is meditation. And that's there in the universal prayer as well. So in that meditation, we're going to have to understand the oneness that we can achieve with God. Again, in order to do that, you've got to peel away this physical body. It's valueless. So everything that you attach value to, you have to peel it away. Doesn't matter who you are, what you own, how much money you have. Think about yourself when you die. What is it that matters? And that is all that will matter. So that is the meditation. You meditate on what is divine because you want to achieve that oneness. Even a moment, a fleeting moment of understanding that oneness with God gives you bliss. And why it is called bliss is because it truly helps you understand your reality. That reality which created the universe. I mean, can you imagine? You created this universe. That's how great you are. But when you think instead of your greatness being measured by our earthly wants and desires and our stature and our position and what you own and what you can command, you're short-selling yourself. You're truly short-selling yourself. You are much, much more than that. And the measure of your greatness is not what you can do on earth, but what you can do to yourself in understanding your nature. That is your measure of greatness. Maybe you won't be able to do what you have to do here. There's one student of Swami who was telling me about this friend of his who was also a Swami student, who was one of the bhajan singers in Puttaparthi. And he had a beautiful job as a chartered accountant in a prestigious firm after he graduated. And he decided he doesn't want that. He could have had a beautiful car, a building. They provided allowance for him to maintain his house. He gave everything up. And he said, I cannot find the same bliss and joy I had when I sang my bhajans. Because at that moment when I sang my bhajans in front of Swami, I was lost. Because I was meditating on this divine being. And I want to experience that meditation. So he quit his job. He had a wife and a child. And they said, so what do we do? Dad, we need money. He said, no, we pray. We pray through meditation. We pray through our praises of the Lord. And the third part I'll tell you later. So he sang. He went on the road literally. This guy is an educated guy. He had a master's degree. He was a chartered accountant. He had a good job. Gave everything up. Went on the road singing songs. Went here and there. Couldn't earn much money. Went off to Delhi. Then went off to Hyderabad. Tried to sing just on the street. Start singing. People would join him. Outside a temple, he would sing. Beautiful voice. Obviously, God-given gift. And again, think about voice, right? Rajasic with space. So this fellow was singing beautiful, moving, touching bhajans. And one very wealthy man was passing by near a temple and he said, I'd like you to teach my son music. This guy said, sure. So he went and started teaching music to the son. And it was so beautiful that this wealthy man thought, all this has to be recorded. We cannot let this go just like this. And he said, I want to record this. And I want to be able to spread the glory of the Lord. And the student said, sure, Go ahead and do it. So they started doing that. Well, anyway, one thing led to another. This fellow would find foods from somewhere. The rich man would give him food someday for his family, but still he was living hand to mouth. And his happiness came from only one source, from his communion with God. Every time he sang, there was that communion with God. And that communion defines who we are. That defines why we exist. We do not exist for anything else. We can fool ourselves, kid ourselves into thinking, I have to do my duty, I have to do this, I have to, the truth is you exist, as Swami says, to be one with Him, to understand your divinity. That's why we exist. We're given this opportunity to do that. So this boy was doing exactly that. And his whole life, day and night, he was lost in thoughts of God. Until eventually, a big record company heard his bhajans and his singing and said, this is remarkable. How can this guy be just like this? And they approached him and said, let me speak to your agent. And he said, what? And, he said, I'm not going to sign up for anything. This is something I do for my own communion with God. But all I need is food. And I need to make sure my child gets educated and my wife is happy. So the recording company said, sure, we'll do that. And so he's happy. He's happy in his own way. If you think about it, you can say, well, he could have done this. What has he achieved in this earth? Somebody else is something else, big shot. This guy is not that. But you know what? He is truly happy in his communion with God. And that happiness we are all trying to achieve. And it came to him. So we have to think about that. The glory of Swami is so mind-boggling that even when he tells us who he is, we don't believe it. We say, oh yeah, he's that. But what is the meaning of that? Swami himself told me on one occasion, I am Shiva. Very clear. Very clear. And it still didn't sink in me what that means. Until I found out that I have to keep checking on myself and testing myself to see if I really understand this. If I and God are one, how do I exhibit that? What is the behavior that I would see in myself if I believe that I and God are one? What is that behavior? So when Swami is there in his physical form, we want his Pada Namaskar. We want him to look at us. We want him to take our letter, and so on and so forth. Is that communion with God? That is communion with a human form. It's not an understanding of the reality behind that human form, the divinity behind that human form. Because if that divinity is understood, and our divinity is also understood, and our connection is one, why ask anything? And I'll tell you about this as well, because I talked to Swami about this. So how do we define our divinity as being one with God, and at the same time, we go and ask God for various things? It's a lie. Look at yourself and look at your own behavior, and you can say, yeah, you know what, I really don't believe. When he tells me he's Shiva, the honest thing for me to say is, Swami, I don't believe you. Of course, I didn't say that. But, that is the truth. So I have to gauge myself. I have to know whether I am proceeding and progressing on this path of understanding divinity. There was one occasion several years ago in 1997. There was a overseas gentleman who was very ill, had a stroke, and at that time there was no neurology or neurosurgery in Swami's hospitals. And Swami wanted me to look after this gentleman, which I did. And at that time, every day, Swami would call me and we would have an interview and he would talk to me. And this went on for close to 2 weeks. And each of the times he would ask me things and I would talk to him. If I thought of him as a physician, he would talk to me like a physician. If I thought of him as divine, he would talk to me as divine. To the extent that if I had a question about whether I should give a certain medication, he would clarify it. He knew the names of medications. He knew what the medications would do. Of course, he's divine. But that's how he would interact. On the other hand, if I wanted to talk to him about spiritual things, he would interact exactly as a spiritual guru. And if I talked to him as God, he would interact as God. So one of these times, I truly started believing in who Shiva is and what his reality is and what our reality is. To the extent I really do not believe I need anything from Swami. I don't. I don't need his Pada Namaskar. I don't need his Vibhuti. And I really, really do believe that. Because why? I have him. I have the goose that laid the golden egg. I don't need anything else. I run away with this goose. So I have him. I have God. Now, do I believe that? Well, one of these interviews, Swami was very pleased with what I was doing. And he hugged me. And then made Vibhuti. And put it in my hand. And said, take. I held it in my hand. And I looked at Swami and said, Swami, please, I don't need this. Can I take it to the patient? Of course, I could have eaten that and I could have had more blessing or whatever. But when you have God, you don't need anything else. And Swami was very pleased and hugged me again, took that Vibhuti, held my hand, put it in a piece of paper, folded that paper, put it in my pocket, did this, and then looked at my hand. Then he said, you can lick it. So the last little piece I licked. But our connection with God, you've got to keep testing that. Test yourself, test your behavior, test your thinking. And in true meditation, the second part of a prayer, to achieve that communion, you have to keep checking on whether you truly believe in this oneness with divinity. That's the most important part. Because in that oneness comes everything. We talk about God's daya or pity or the way we interact with God. All that can happen if you understand that oneness and behave in a way which is consistent with that understanding. Have the firm faith. Faith. Very important. Very important. That is the base. That's how we start our life. Swami asked one time, my son, myself, my daughter, we were all there with Swami. My son was 7 years old. And Swami looked at him and said, how old are you? And he said, 7. So then Swami looked at him and said, how do you know? So he was baffled. He didn't know. So he looked at me. And I was like those, in the school, I'm trained at this. So how to avoid questions coming to you. So you look down, no eye contact, all that. So I was doing that. And then Swami asked my daughter and she said, I don't know. He asked my wife, she said, I don't know. He didn't ask me. So then he said, how do you know that you're 7 years old? Because your mother told you. She told you when you were born. Or a hospital told you when you were. So there is faith. So the foundation, the first step, the first part of your life, you start your life with faith. You define yourself with that thing which is based on faith. Then comes other things. Then you can try to understand your nature. You can understand your surroundings, your environment, and your divinity or whatever. But first comes faith. So we must have that indelible, unshakable faith in our true identity. The test of that identity is not what we can do. It is not for me to say, if I am really divine, I'm going to make that flower fall. False. That's not how it works. The true test of that divinity, the true test of that oneness is the bliss you feel and in your behavior. And that leads us to the third part. The third part is surrender. So the prayer that we make to Swami, or what we ask in our conversation with Swami, that's the third part of every prayer. There's really nothing to ask. If you believed in the first part, if you believed in the second part, what are you going to ask? You are it. You are divine. You are a piece of this universe. You have the power to create the universe. You have nothing to ask. And the only thing perhaps you can ask Swami is, Swami, help me surrender. Help me shed this Maya, this body. Help me shed this that tells me I am not you. Throw this out. Take it out. You be the surgeon. You take it out of me, that which tells me I'm not you, because that's not true. It's not true, it's not true, it's not true, it's not true. Keep saying that, and that's why Swami says, Soham, 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 Soham. Keep saying that, I and you are one, I and you are one. That's the only reality. Have 100% faith in that. That reality is not tested by what you can do and your supernatural powers, but it is tested truly by your bliss and peace. And by the way you live, that you really have no need for anything else in this universe. You walk not alone, but with the divine. And when I walk with you, I have to see that divine. That is the truth. But if we are caught in this Maya, that is the only prayer we can ask Swami. Swami, take this away. Or ask Swami truly to give us whatever he thinks is right for us. We cannot ask for anything else to Swami. Those are not prayers, those are desires that are being expressed. And we can mold it in various ways to confound our thinking. We can fool ourselves into saying, what is wrong in asking Swami something? What am I doing? He is my father, he is my mother. I'm just asking the same that I would ask a father or a mother, and so on and so forth. But you know what? Without surrendering, he can't do much. You all know the prayer of surrender. But the truth is, it's like, I'm here, I'm a little boy, and my favorite toy is broken, and I'm crying, I want it fixed. And I go to my dad and say, please fix it, but I won't give it to him. He can't fix it. You have to give it away. So the surrender is the only alternative for us. That's the only option. Even in a conversation, even if he's your father, he's your mother, and you want to say things that you want and you desire, you got to surrender. That's the only way for things to happen. And when you ask for surrender, then you surrender everything. Not just a few selective things, but everything. And everything that you do not surrender does not matter. So think about it like that what you do not surrender, it does not matter. So with Swami, these three aspects of prayer have to be there to complete a prayer and to complete your communion with God. And he answers in ways that you don't even expect. Because what you want is this divine communion with God. He will give that to you in different ways. Ways that you don't expect. I was telling a story to some of the people who are here, the physicians and those who work in the medical camps. In 2010, we had this medical conference for cardiology and cardiac surgery. We had people from all over the world come for this. And at the end of the conference, we had a darshan with Swami, just Swami and the conference people. It was late in the night. And so we were all sitting there, Swami was sitting there, and he looked one by one, looked at each one of us. And there was this cardiac surgeon from Brazil. And he looked at him and called him. And this guy, I know him well, he just broke down, started crying. And he walked up to the stage where Swami was sitting, and tears, and sat next to Swami. And Swami asked him, what do you want? He said, nothing, and cried. That's all he did. So Swami took out his handkerchief, and you would think he's going to wipe himself, and wiped the tears off of this guy in such a loving manner that truly tells you the relationship between the individual and God. And then he put that handkerchief in that guy's pocket. He didn't ask for anything. If he had asked, Swami would have given him that. If he had asked for a ring, Swami would have given him that. Swami was ready to give him anything, and he said, I want nothing. So, and then he got what he needed at that time. Something he will never forget in his life, never. So, we have to direct our prayers towards only one goal, towards understanding the divine. And he tries to show it to us in 100 different ways, and we close our eyes. We don't want to see who we are. We don't want to see divinity. And this mistake happens so easily. I'm sure many of you have experienced situations where something happens, an event happens, and after it is done, you realize, oh my God, that was Swami. So you missed on experiencing the divine until afterwards. That joy is gone because your mind is not vigilant. Your mind is not constantly thinking of God. If you're constantly thinking of God, if you're constantly in communion with God, then this would not be an issue. That constant prayer, and that's why that prayer, even in the Bible they talk about it, incessant prayers, all the time. To the extent that even when you're asleep, the prayers will keep going on in your mind. Then when you think, you're thinking only God. And that is when something happens, you will not miss it. And we all make mistakes. We all miss the presence of divinity in different ways. In our own medical camp, in various places, Bob, Usha, and Dr. Raju know about it, we have had events that happen that really stir us. We have flowers that appear, we have people who show up who later on realize, oh my God, that must be Swami. Even for, we used to have a rule and our dedication to the divine as opposed to the body. How do we know we believe in the divine and not the body? Well, look at our own behavior. So we as doctors, we decided that we will have our medical camp in Puttaparthi, in Prashanti Nilayam. And every time we have that, it's from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And all the doctors are working, nobody goes for darshan. We miss Swami's darshan. And initially we were thinking, like, are we crazy? We come here all the way, we take vacation, give up our earnings, we come here. What are we doing? Then we slowly transformed. We started saying every patient is Swami, and every time we see a patient, we have darshan of Swami. And then we started believing in what we are saying, and so on. So our belief in the fact that we are divine has to be shown in our actions. If we had run to see Swami and get his darshans, while at the same time preaching that, yes, we are divine, we are belying our truth. What we say is not true. It's a lie. Swami knows that. He may not even see us. He may not even talk to us. But that's not the issue. Our doctors and volunteers gave up a lot. They could have gone on, got a sari for Ladies' Day. They gave up that. They could have got prasad for this and that, and they gave up all that, and they worked. They worked with their focus and sharpening their belief, this is God, this is God, this is God, this is God. Until eventually your behavior resonated with your belief. That is the important thing. Your behavior has to resonate with your belief. At the end of it, in 2010, Swami gave us, and I'm sure many of you know, the most wonderful darshan to every doctor. It's just mind-boggling, mesmerizing darshan before he passed away and left his body. So we have to be able to give up our attachment to the body in practical terms. Put your mouth where your money is, or put your money where your mouth is. We say we are God, but then we don't behave like we are God. That's not truth. So what Swami tells us by these three aspects of prayer is that every prayer we should begin, that's part of the universal prayer, we should begin by contemplating the glory of the Lord. Who is God? What is divine? So that's the first part of prayer. The second part of prayer is to meditate, ruminate on that thought, and think about the divine, and that you are indeed part of that. Look how powerful you are. That is the power you're looking at. Look what you can achieve. There has to be a way. And, you might sometimes doubt yourself, well, does this, if I'm truly this small being, how can God hear me? And Swami has said 100 times, I hear you because I'm part of you. I'm inside you. Hridayavasi, I'm inside. I'm part of you. I'm in you, around you, above you, below you. I'm everywhere. But it doesn't sink in. But think about this. Ear is made by this little interaction between sattvic and space. But for him who is divine, he's got the entire sattva guna. He's got the entire element of space in his command. And that interaction gives you the biggest ear. Right? So he can hear you. There's no doubt about it. There are many instances where Swami has shown that, proven that he can hear your every little thought. You can't hide from him. And why that is important is not because you can say, this man, he can do that. He understands what I can think. That's not the reason. The reason is he's trying to demonstrate to you that, look, I as divine can hear you as divine. That's what is important. So how do we call him? How do we pray to him? There are many ways. For me personally, Swami told me, I asked him this question about how, Swami, I'm far away somewhere else in another continent. How do I call you when I really need you? And he looked at me with a smile and he said, call me with your hands. Now, that doesn't mean that I have to do this. It just means I have to work harder, selfless work, where I put myself away and live and do things only for God. The more I need Swami, the harder I work. I work harder to serve those who need to be served. Not because without my service it will be some terrible thing. God is in command, right? I mean, there's a blind man or there's a man with a brain tumor or whatever it is, somebody will take, if I don't do it, there's somebody, don't worry. It's ego to think that I'm the only one who can take care of it. That's wrong. But when I dedicate myself to that person beyond identity of my body, beyond identifying the needs of this body, then I am really shouting out loud to Swami with my hands. I'm shouting to him, and he will hear. And there are plenty of instances in my own life where he has heard it. So, demolish this body, get rid of this body, bhasma, that bhajan that you had, bhasma, that's the essence of it. Your ego, your body, your physical, your attachment, get rid of it. And show that it can be gotten rid of. Because what is left is purity and divinity. And that's what Swami wants us to appreciate through prayer. Other than that, prayer has no other meaning. I mean, we go, we ask Swami for many things. Swami makes fun of it. As a human being, we sing prayers where we say, the beautiful eyes of Rama or the beautiful eyes of Swami, his beautiful feet, his beautiful hands. Go beyond that. That's all the body is. Go on to prayers to the next step. Go to prayers where you sing the glory of divinity, of that force of divinity. That is where you should be, not at this level where it's human. People say Swami is divine in human form. It's much more than that. He is a human who yearns for us to recognize the true divinity that he represents, that he is. So when we go there, now we don't have that option. That body is not there. So he has forced our cards down, like when you play poker. Now's the time to call a spade a spade. Look at yourself and ask yourself, where do I stand in my devotion to God? It is by your belief that you're divinity. How much do you believe that you're divine? And to what extent are you willing to surrender your desires, your needs, everything associated with your body and this world? To what extent are you willing to surrender? And your mind will generate arguments that go against it, that does not want you to do this. It will say you have a duty, you have to produce, you have to have money, you have to live in this world, and so on, and quote from this and that and so on. But calm down and think about what is it that you really want to choose. And call yourself just that. If you say, yes, I want to do this because of duty or whatever, and so on, and I want to do this, I want to earn this living, and I want to use that money to help others, whatever reason you can concoct, do that, but don't kid yourself. You're not thinking that you're divine, and accept that. So in a prayer, that communion with God has to be a communion of truth, has to be a communion of the divine with the divine. And it is a communion that can only be experienced. Unfortunately, it is not somewhere you can suddenly see light or a spark or see something creating. We don't have that much ability to do that as yet because of our lack of faith. That's all that is needed to create. That's what Swami says. And I asked him about this. How does he create something? And he said, faith. Again, twice I had this message from him of faith. Right? Faith. So if it doesn't happen, it's because there's no faith. That's the important part. And that faith in your reality creates the new reality for you. How much you believe in that reality is how much you will be. So, to be more, you have to have more faith. That way, you're going in a path that guides you towards the divine and experiencing that divine. Once in a while, we'll slip up. We will forget. And little jokes Swami plays. He's always playing little jokes, because spirituality is not, it's not all about seriousness and punishing yourself. It's never about punishing yourself. It's about being happy. But being happy in a true way, by understanding who you are. Maybe ourselves had many little instances. There was one time we inaugurated the gastroenterology unit in Swami's Puttaparthi Hospital, and some of our gastroenterologists, Dr. Hari Kanjivaram and Dr. Kamath, both the husband and wife, they were all there. And Swami just said, he sent word that he'll be there. And so we waited. We had a patient ready to start off the inauguration, and Swami didn't show up. And we were really sad, obviously, because at that time our purpose was to see Swami. To a lot, all the doctors over there, it was just that. And I felt, whatever it is, it hasn't changed my relationship with God. So the other doctors sat down and they sang. They sang the Gayatri, they did bhajans, continuous, non-stop. And look how Swami tests you. In the middle of that, I get a phone call. And the phone call says, it's from Swami's room. And it says, he's not coming. So, you go ahead, take care of the patient. I didn't have the heart to tell these doctors, because they're all doing their bhajans and Sai Gayatri non-stop. So I quietly slid out of the hospital, went to the ashram, and I get another phone call from one of the people in the hospital, and he says he just heard from Sathya, Swami is going to be in the hospital in 45 minutes. We were traveling at sub-light speeds, just rushing up, and how word spreads, by the time we were going on that road, and we were going at, over 100 kilometers per hour in that road, people were already sitting. So everybody knew about it but us. We were all sitting there. So we went in and we had a beautiful darshan of Swami. Now, why did this happen? The strength of prayer. Now, the prayer was not to have Swami in his physical presence. I don't think any of the doctors prayed for that reason. They all get to see Swami in darshans. The prayer was so that the divine would meet the divine patient. The divine entity, God, will meet the divine patient. Because the patient was told Swami is going to come. They didn't want to disappoint him. So they were praying and praying for that reason, not for themselves. It was just very touching when Swami came. And even when he came, he does his little tricks. The day before, to tell you that he can hear everything, right? And how easily we miss it. The day before, we had set up, apart from all the gastroenterology unit, we had a big exhibition of posters. And so we set up all the posters late into the night, and about 12 o'clock or something, or past midnight, one villager guy walks in to the hospital. The doors are open, I suppose. He walks in, comes in, looks at all the posters over there, and then comes to me, and Dr. Chari is there, and one of the posters shows the bowel. And he just looks at it and says, oh, how big is this, sir? I'm not a gastroenterologist. And so we said, wait a minute. So we went and got our experts. We have all these gastroenterologists from Florida and Michigan. And so we asked them, how big is it? 25 feet. So we told this guy 25 feet. The guy said, no, sir, more. 30, 35 feet. He said, yeah, whatever. So we had work to do, so we started doing our work, right? Anyway, next day, so all this drama happens, Swami doesn't show up. Finally, Swami shows up and he comes in. People are just ecstatic, they're happy. We go and show him all the inside of the hospital, and then we come out with Swami and we see all the posters with Swami. And Dr. Chandrachari starts explaining to him one poster after another, poster after another. So this poster comes and she tells Swami, Swami, this is it, this is the bowel, and we can do such and such with it. It's so Swami says, wait, in Tamil, how big is the bowel? So Chandra is, Dr. Chandra is smart. She's just consulted all these experts. So she said, 25 feet. Wrong. 30, 35 feet. And he goes away. He lost interest in this poster. That was it. So this is to illustrate that he is truly everywhere. He really is. We miss it. We miss it because we are dwelling on our body. We have to finish these posters. We have to make the place spick and span. We have, in all that, we are losing who we are. Every time we get involved in the world, we lose who we are. But every time we use the world to enhance our divinity, we know who we are. That's the only purpose God has given us this world, to use it to enhance our divinity, to understand who we are. That way we'll always remember God. We'll never forget. And believe me, there will always be moments you'll forget God, and that's the sad part. At the time of death, you don't want to forget God. Start training yourself right now. In the Kathopanishad, they talk about this. And Swami's Prema Vahini as well. If at the moment of death, your thought is very important. It defines your future. And there are all these stories. You know about the story Swami talks about, this fellow who named all his sons different gods' names, and finally, on the moment of death, he says, so all of you are here, so who's guarding the treasury? And he dies. So he's thinking about the money and he dies. So it is our grace from Swami, from the divine, that through prayer we can achieve this communion. That is his grace. He's given us that grace. It's up to us to use it. Swami himself has given this wonderful illustration, the story of a guy who, and many of you, pardon me if you know the story and I'm repeating it, of this guy who prays and prays and prays and does tapas, and finally God comes down to him and says, okay, what do you want? And he says, he's already a wealthy guy. He says, I want more wealth. And God says, but how can you have more wealth than what you already have? He says, I want Lakshmi herself. And so God says, okay, you can have Lakshmi, but on one condition. Okay, she will go with you from here to your home. She'll follow you behind. Never can you look back at her during that journey. If you look back, gone. She'll leave you. So he says, oh, that's a no-brainer, no problem. So he gets Lakshmi, and she's behind, and he's walking home, and he keeps going. So he got the grace of God, right? God gave him his grace. He had some desire. God's grace was upon him. We all yearn for God's grace. So he's walking and Lakshmi is behind him, and there's all this noise of, jewelry clanking, and the guy couldn't bear himself and says, I've got to look at all this enormous jewelry, and Lakshmi herself coming to me. And he turns and looks at her and she says, I told you can't do this. That's it, I'm leaving. So many of us have God's grace. That's not important. To experience that grace, that is a prayer worth having. This man had God's grace, but he did not experience that grace. So, through our prayer and through our communion with the divine, if we shed this body and if we shed who we are in our belief, and instead go to who we are in our faith and demonstrate that faith, that serves the purpose of our life. There's nothing beyond that. And everything you do in this world is connected with that singular purpose that you want to do, to understand your divinity. That's why you go to work. That's why you're driving. That's why you're talking. That's why you're doing everything that you do with this body, to understand that divine entity that you are. That's the only purpose of this body. It's nothing beyond that. It is not to serve, to help, but to serve is not the end. It is not a goal. To serve is a means to achieve a bigger goal. Every seva, every act of service must be understood and must be carried out with that in mind, that it is not a goal to serve, but it is a means to achieve another goal. And that goal you should never lose track of. So that puts meaning to service. And that turns things around. This boy I mentioned to you, the student, the reason his bhajans were so powerful was because it truly came from the heart. Your service can be very powerful. It can touch someone if you truly do it with this as your goal. Not just to do the service, but to go beyond that. That's just a means. Because you want, whatever you want to do with your body, with your senses, it is to eventually go to the divine. So if you think this service can be done better to help you go to the divine, then focus on that. Put more bhava into your service. Try to understand the one you serve. Try to see the divinity in whom you're serving. All that is very, very, very important. And this was taught to me not, this was long ago, as Sundarji was saying, with Mother Teresa. I was, one of the times when I was working with her, we would go and bathe all these homeless people who are dying. It's a home for dying and destitute. And I would do all that, and then I would go and live in my 5-star hotel. And so one of these times, I was coming back, and Mother asked me, so where are you living? Where are you staying? Because we have breakfast together every day. And so I said, in such and such place. And she said, you have no idea what you're doing. What are you doing? I said, I'm helping these people and I'm serving them. She said, no, you're not. You're serving yourself. And to what end? So then I told her, I said, Mother, I'm just astounded by what you do, and I wish I could do that. You're an extremely compassionate person, and I don't have that. I don't know how to motivate that compassion. And she said, no, Venkat. She got angry, held me and went up in her house. There's stairs that go up, and where the stairs bend, there's a big statue of Jesus. And she said, that is Jesus. And so is this person, and so is this person, and so is this person. Do you see that? I said, I don't. She said, that's your problem. And the people that you serve, do you know what they want? They don't want your fancy medicine. They don't want you to wash them. They want you to understand them. They want you to give them dignity. And she told me at that time, she said, if you really want to understand those you serve, become them. That's how you get your oneness with divinity. So I took a few days off and literally lived as a homeless man in Calcutta, wandering from bridges. I had no money, no food, nothing. To understand those that you serve is important, because then it changes how you serve. And why you want to change how you serve is because that service is not an end in itself. That service is a goal to achieve another end. And that end is communion with God. So you can pray with your mouth, with all these 3 aspects that I mentioned, or you can pray with your hands, like Swami said. But in doing so, make sure these 3 aspects are there, that your act of service is a meditation, that your act of service understands the glory of God and the unity between us. And your act of service asks God for only one thing, to help you understand your oneness with God. Nothing else. That's why you serve. So let every act of service be a prayer. In fact, a lot of things can be prayers, if you think about it. Make sure that these 3 aspects are there. And through many things which you can make into a prayer, you can achieve this end of coming close to God. And I can say no further. I'll end this by just quoting from Brother Lawrence. He was a Carmelite monk in the 1600s. And this monk was a cook. He would cook in a kitchen. And he says, he wrote these letters. And in one of the letters he says, amidst all the clutter and the noise around me, where people are constantly talking and, I want this, they order for masala dosa, whatever. They don't do that in France, but whatever it is they're ordering, among all that noise, he is at peace. as if he is kneeling in front of the Holy Sacrament. His mind is with God. That is true communion. You can live in this world and do what you have to do, but do not do it in a way that takes you away from you. It's not worth it. Jai Sai Ram. Believe me when I say that Sathya Sai Baba is beyond materializations and who you have seen as a human being. He is truly much more. And there is a form of his that can be seen and that needs to be seen in this lifetime by each of us. Then truly we have lived this life. We can say that. But, you know, the time when Swami asked me to study medicine, it did shake me up a bit because I was happy. He was a tenured professor and having a happy life. And I had a PhD, so I went, in one of the interviews, Swami said, I looked at me and said, I want you to be a doctor. There are many times he jokes with me, so I thought this is another joke, so I laughed. And then he said, why are you laughing? So I said, Swami, with your grace, I'm already a doctor because I had a PhD. And he said, gee, not that doctor, stethoscope doctor. So, to just give you an idea of his humor and how he interacts with individuals, but with each interaction there is a deeper meaning. There was one occasion where this is many years ago. I came to Swami in 1980, and so many years ago. I was sitting there right in front of the interview room. Swami would come out, and there were all these students who had birthdays, his students, so Swami would give them some gifts. So he had some apples, so he brought in these tiny little kids, very cute little ones. He gave some apples to them, and he asked the kids, one was from Assam, and I remember that. So Swami asked him, have you seen apple? And the kid said, oh yes, Swami, I've seen apple. Assam, they have apple. Oh, kitna bada, how big are your apples in Assam? And the kid said, everybody laughed, Swami laughed. So then he went back into his room, and as he went, each time in and out of the room, his gown hits my leg, and he goes in. And he comes out with some wristwatches. And he goes and gives each of these kids a wristwatch for their birthday. And this was many years ago. My mind was still raw. I was thinking, oh my God, how I wish my kids were here. And, get this from Swami. Just a thought. That's all I had. Fleeting thought. And he goes back to his room. So on the way again, his gown is, rubbing against me. When he looks at me, angry face, and he has exactly 2 watches in his hands. And he said, Tisco! He throws it on my lap. Take this. It's a very angry face. And he's had this angry face many times with me. But it's always to correct. It's always with a message, a very clear message, right? That even a fleeting thought about what you want in this life as a human being is irrelevant. We have come here for bigger things and better things. We have not come here for this. This is not why we exist. This is not why He's given us birth. We're much more beyond that. And we have to snap out of this dream. And it truly is a dream. And it's a dream that you begin to understand when you realize, as Swami says, one of the 16 attributes that we have is the mind. And the mind is very, very powerful. The mind can create the Maya. But remember, only the mind can destroy the Maya. Use the mind properly, judiciously. It can be your friend or it can be your enemy. And that's what Swami tries to show in his interactions, in what he says, what he does. If we have dreams of him, it's very important. But then to understand that dream is not just yes, I had a dream of Swami. Yes, your day is done. It's not like that. You have to try and understand the meaning of that dream. I just got a phone call as I was coming here from another person, a Sathya Sai devotee who's a physician, who's a surgeon in the US, and he underwent, they diagnosed him with a very devastating cancer. And that night he had a dream, 2 dreams. Swami came to him, and there were 2 separate dreams that he could recall. And Swami talked to him about this and said, if you see me and if you know that I am in you, nothing can harm you. That's all he said. Now, we may think, why is Swami not saying directly? Many times people tell me that. Why can he not just come down and say, look, I want you to learn such and such, so I'm doing this to you. Spoon feeding doesn't help us learn. Even when he told me he was Shiva, it just doesn't strike. You don't understand, comprehend the magnitude of what he's trying to say. And so, in the mind of the surgeon, it was like, why can you not tell me? Am I cured or not? What's the bottom line, Swami? That's what he asked Swami in the dream. And he said, I am with you. So what does that mean? I am with you. And the dream ended, right? Then there was a second dream, which was for him to go to a certain place and get a biopsy done. As a physician, Swami talked to him as a physician. Anyway, he went there, got the biopsy, and it's benign. So I think a lot of these interactions with the divine have to be viewed not as incidents in the life of a mortal, but rather as beacons in the life of the divine. We are divine. And every interaction with Swami is a beacon into our life as a divine. Not something that is a landmark in our life as a human. That has no value. Literally no value. But the other part, if you can gather the import of what Swami says, that has value. And there are plenty of instances where Swami keeps reminding you of that, and they're just remarkable. Remarkable. I mean, my own father, he passed away in 2006, and he eventually died. He was diabetic, he had stroke, he had a whole lot of things. And every time I would visit him, it was just hard for me as a physician to let him have his favorite food, which was Parle Gluco biscuit. And I would just say, no, Appa, no, you cannot. I can't do it. And he'd say, please. It was so hard for me, so hard. And I would sometimes be in tears. Then once I'm gone, my mother and sister would give him whatever he wants, right? Eventually, when he passed away, and that's another story. It's just a remarkable experience. But he passed away, and after all the, we did all the function here in Los Angeles, finished everything, and immediately went to Parthi. And that was the time there was the Atirudra Mahayagna. So we sat there, and as soon as I came first, and then my mother and sister were coming a few days later, sat there, and Swami came out, and then he called me and he said, when did you come? I said, Swami, I came just now. He said, when is Amma coming? I said, Swami, another 2 days. And he said, go. And I tried to tell him, Swami, my father died, and but he just said, go sit down. And it's a message. It's a message that, the events that we consider significant in our lives are truly not that significant. It is a semicolon. Our whole life is a semicolon in this grand opera that Swami has written. That's who we are, a semicolon. So it really doesn't matter. And I'm trying to tell him that. So anyway, he said, go sit down. So I sat down. And then 2 days later, my mother and sister came, and they took their shower, bath, and then came to darshan. And I was also there sitting in darshan with my eyes closed. And bhajans were going on, and right after bhajans, so everything finished, and then Swami called the students to give prasadam, and my eyes were still closed. And Swami came right in front of me, and he had prasadam, and again threw it in my lap, and I woke up, and it's a packet of Parle Gluco biscuit. how the divine communicates with you. It's time for me to stop talking. That's what Swami is saying. But how the divine communicates with you is very touching. He didn't have to say to me anymore that my Father is merged with him, which all of us do. And there's no reason for me to go to him and say, Swami, my father died. Now, what I tried to do was ridiculous. He knows. And this is proof that he knows. Now our monkey mind can say, hey, is this a coincidence? And I went to the guy who organizes prasadam saying, when was the previous history of all prasadam? When was parle glucose? It never happened. So your monkey mind can do things and contort your thinking, but the truth doesn't change. And each incident, Swami wants you to learn the truth. How he understands our deepest, innermost needs. But he says, push all that aside and come only to me. That is the only need that you need. Nothing else. Prayers are really very minimal. The glory, the first part of a prayer, which is the glory of God, the meditation, those are important. Finally, the sambhashan part is not very significant. If you really want to ask something, you ask that. Give me whatever you want to give me. Now, that's not the issue. Right? It's your understanding of divine. That's the issue. So, if I get everything from God, but on the moment of death I can't think of God, I've wasted my life. So I don't want that. I don't want to live like that. But I don't know what he wants to give me. Maybe he'll steal that thought away from me. That's what he wants. But to be able to surrender to God, everything including yourself, is more than just words. It is an act. It is a life. It's the way you live your life. And that's very, very, very important. Thank you for pointing that. I mean, we know this story of one of Swami's very close devotees who was involved in a motor vehicle accident, and when his car was smashed up and his wife was unconscious, and he's thinking, what on earth is going on? I've got to call the ambulance. Who's going to help me? And he looks around, and that stupid guy, he smashed my car, and he should have looked where he was going. And then somebody who was standing somewhere else came and took his wife and took her to the hospital. And stop me if you know this story, if everyone knows the story already. But so then finally she's in the hospital and she's pronounced dead on arrival. And Swami, and this guy phones and he said this has happened. So they talked to Swami, and Swami said, it's okay, you give her injection. And we always think, oh my God, okay, Swami doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, there's no what to do, and you're all ashamed of telling somebody, give injection. So anyway, he conveyed that message to this fellow who went to the doctor, and by that time his wife is in the morgue. Okay? And he tells the doctor, give her injection. The doctor says, are you crazy? I declared her dead. She's gone. She's dead. And what injection do you want me to give? I don't know. Injection. So, no idea at all. So, finally he goes up to a nurse and says, give her injection. So, they think he's gone crazy. So, the nurse takes a saline syringe, puts a needle to it, and through the cloth in the morgue, and the cloth is there, she stabs the wife with this syringe and just shoves the saline inside. And she wakes up. Right? And anyway, so finally he goes back and Swami tells him, what was your thought at that time? Did you call me? Did you think of me? You're thinking of who was at fault, who hit you, what's happening to your wife. Did you think of calling me? So our thought that we can have in our last moments of life are so important that that is the grace that I want to have. That is what I would pray to Swami, if there's anything to ask. Otherwise, the best is just, Swami, you know everything. Give me what you have come to give me, and that's it. Now let me merge with you. Let's get down to business. As I said, I cannot help but identify myself with that, with whoever I serve. to my own physical detriment sometimes. My brothers here know I don't eat sometimes. Sleep is not important, because whom I serve is important. There's nothing beyond that. My brothers phone me up and say, Dr. Raju phones me up and says, have you eaten? Sometimes I don't, because that's irrelevant. I think what is needed to be done to serve in order to understand your divinity is different from what is needed to be done to just serve. There's a difference between the two. And we should be willing to go beyond just service, I feel, in my humble opinion. There aren't many people in the world who would recognize that there is a difference. And he tests you, he puts circumstances where, I've done that, where I would say, there was one occasion where he told me, and I don't usually discuss personal interviews, but there is this one occasion where he told me, you come, you work in my hospital, I'll give you anything you need. Because, the ring he gave me, I lost weight because I wasn't eating properly. It became loose, so I told him, Swami, it's loose. So then he said, you come, you work in my hospital, I'll give you rings, necklaces, anything you want. Just come and work. So when I was working in his hospital, I thought, okay, so I'm here, Swami, I can ask you anything I want. And I said, no, I just want what you want to give me. That's all. Right? Your story will never end there, because the moment you say that, he's going to put circumstances in front of you, and you have to keep gasping, just like you gasp for air. You keep saying at that time, no, Swami, independent of what I see, it's all a nightmare, it's all unreal. Only you, only your will, let that be your bhajan, let that be your meditation, only your will, Swami, only. Don't let him scare you. He'll try. Don't let him scare you. Because when his will prevails, the world is different. Completely different. Even if what you wanted does not happen, when his will prevails, it doesn't matter. That is the beauty of it. You will say, it didn't matter. So, ask for that. Because if he gives you this, it will matter. Then you will ask for something more, and that will matter. And your life will be an endless stream of desires. But when you stick to that and keep telling yourself, no. Despite all the dragons and monsters I see in front of me, only your will, Swami. Only your will. Only your will. Only your will. Keep insisting. That should be your mantra, until finally he says, okay, I believe you. And then his will prevails. And that's a different life. It is hard. I do agree and understand, but it is worth doing that. The value of my physical interaction with him, I love Swami very, very much. He is my life. But the value of that physical interaction dropped. So the share price dropped, if you will. Because the value of something else was much more that he can give. So yes, that did change. But as I said, you really then get this feeling. It doesn't matter. You don't play games anymore where you say, Swami, if you look at me, it means it's okay to do this. If the flower falls, it's okay to do this, then I'm blessed. Or, if you take this letter, then it's okay. I truly have him. I cannot say that enough, because that changes your interaction with the divine completely. If I die today, I die. But I die with the belief that I am him and I have him. I think that's how it changed. So when he left his body, it was very hard. We all phoned each other. A few of our doctors were very close, and we phoned each other. Dr. Raju phoned me. We talked about it. It was hard. But when you step back and look at it, it is no different from how things were even when the body was there. Because the value of an interaction wasn't that much anymore, even when he was alive. The last darshan he gave us on his birthday, on his star birthday, I think it was November 25th, Bob, correct me if November 25th, 2010, was something that, would be ecstatic normally. But having gone through the understanding of our relationship with Swami, the value of that to the body is highly diminished. There isn't much. And, I know there are photographs floating around and video of that and so on. It doesn't matter to me. So I think eventually there's a lot for us to go. I mean, there's the reason I'm pushed towards this is strongly because of a certain life experience. But it's a life experience that threatens your very life, that made me change this. But to be able to get to this is what I believe I was given a life for. There is no other purpose. So in 1980, I used to live in Pasadena in California. My mother, sister, they were all there. They were Sai devotees even before that. And there was only one major Sai center, the Hollywood Center. And so they would go there for bhajans. And I was a bachelor, so I would take them, because my mother was staying with my sister, my parents were staying with her. So I would take them to the bhajans, drop them off at the Hollywood Sai Center, and I would go. I would go to a Hindu temple where there was free food. That was important to me. So I would go there and eat every time. So one of the, you all know Srinivas and Vimala. So Vimala, I still call her auntie. So she saw this happening, this drama happening, and she said, "Why don't you just come in?" And I said, I don't want to. She said, "Why not?" I said, "I get free food there." Then she said, "No, there'll be food for the soul here. Come." So I said, "Okay, I'll park the car." So I parked the car, got out of the car, and came, and I was wearing shorts. She saw that and said, "Out! Get back into the car. Come next time and properly attired." So I came the next time, and I went in, and as I entered the bhajan hall, Dr. Goldstein's father used to sit at the doorway, and he would always open the door for the devotees to come in. And so as I walked in, he opened the door and said, "Come sit here." So I sat right there by the door, and within a few seconds I started crying, and I just was crying like a baby, and it was so embarrassing. So I just got up and left and went to the washroom, washed my face, put on a serious face, came back in, sat down, broke down again. And I remember the beautiful bhajan. There was a gentleman singing in the Hollywood Center. That was so stirring, that beautiful bhajan, Ram Rahim ko bhajane wale. And then I walked out again. So this kept happening. So I said, this is not for me. There's some thing, I want to be happy. I don't want to be crying. So I got out and stopped listening to bhajans. And I didn't want to see Swami's pictures because they made me cry. And I didn't want to hear about Swami. In fact, I was quite an ardent a fan of Western classical and Indian classical music. My mother teaches Indian classical music, Carnatic music. I stopped listening to all of that. It would make me cry. Western classical would make me cry. I stopped listening. It was a meaningless life because anything with meaning would make me cry, and I didn't want that. Until I went to Whitefield. That was my first encounter with Swami. Many years ago, when I was 18 or 19 years old, in India, I drowned. And during that time, my last thought was, my God, at that time, I was very spiritual at that time, and my thought was always about Murugan, Subramaniam. And my last thought, I remember very well, I was gasping for air in the ocean, and all I could get was water. There was no air, and the last thing I remember was Murugan. I said, Muruga, I don't want to die before my parents die, because I don't want them to be sad. And after that, I had a very interesting experience. But I always thought of myself as a scientist, very rational person, beyond any what I thought was not science. It's the five senses. I dwelt with just the five senses. But one of the things I saw at that time was an apparition of Swami, which I didn't think much about, but that's a different story, and that's not what I wanted to share with you. But when I went to see Swami the first time in Whitefield, I was sitting there, and I went with my mother, and my eyes were closed, and Swami came right in front of me and stood there. I was meditating. I used to meditate quite sometimes from a very young age. I opened my eyes, and all I saw was the same apparition that I saw at that time, many, many years ago. And I started crying in Whitefield, and I just couldn't stop crying. And Swami patted my head and rubbed it and walked away. I think from that time on, things changed in my life. I just had a voracious appetite for Swami's literature, about Swami, his discourses. Everywhere Swami pictures, bhajans, I would sing bhajans, and I just could not stop Swami, 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 Swami. And every time I would go, Swami would, there's a lot of times Swami would come talk to me, and to the extent that people knew this was happening, and they would give me stuff that they had that Swami would bless, and I would give it back to them. So this kept going on for some time, and all these remarkable incidents, how Swami molds you slowly into understanding his true nature in all sorts of fields. The moment you deviate a bit and think that you are more important, that your physical form and your thinking is more important, he'll crush you instantly. And he doesn't wait. In front of people or otherwise, there was a lady once who had breast cancer, and quite advanced. It had metastasized to the brain. She was going to die, usually to a certain part of the brain that we say you live for about 2 to 3 months at the best. And here I was telling this lady that's what's going to happen to her. And the best I could do was to counsel her daughter to stop smoking. And they hadn't had an interview with Swami for ages. She's from Iran, and they were there. Their group was there. And on that day, after I talked to her, I saw her MRI, gave her the counseling. Then Swami calls the group and does his very famous thing, cancer cancelled. And literally 2 years later, I got a letter from her, from Tehran. She's alive, right? So he shows how wrong you can be in what you think, because the moment you think about yourself as the doer and not God, everything falls apart. Your life falls apart. Next time I go there, and there's a Sri Lankan lady with a brain tumor that's in the eye that spread into the brain. And she's again there for a long time without any interviews. And so I go there and I, talk with her and tell her, blah, 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 and then this needs chemotherapy. She doesn't have the money for it. And there's an Australian group, and they're saying, we're willing to pay provided Swami says okay. And I said, Swami hasn't seen these people. They've been here for a few weeks. And I was leaving 2 days later. So the next day, I wanted to find out how much this would cost. I took the lady to the cancer center, to Kidwai in Bangalore, and we went there. We had a consultation, and they told us what it would cost. So I came back, and the Australian group was there, and they said, so, how much is it going to cost? So I said, whatever it was. And they said, sure, no problem. We can support it, provided Swami says it's okay. I said, I don't know. Then I went to her, and I knew from the previous breast cancer story, that anything could happen. So I went to her and I said, don't wait for Swami to call. This is divine. You're blessed that you've been able to have his darshan. She's blind from the tumor. So I said, you've been able to have this darshan even though you cannot see. And that's all that we can ask in our lives. When we ask for more, we want more. When we ask for that, we want more. And that's our human nature. So how do you know that you stop being human? When you stop asking. So I told her all this, big discourse I gave her. And I wanted to, who am I? And I wanted to protect Swami's name. So I told her, whether he gives it or not, still have faith that he's God and all these things. I prepared her for it. Anyway, I'm leaving the next day after darshan. And so I'm sitting there, and Swami comes to me, and I ask him, Swami, can I leave? And I'm leaving today. He said, yeah, you can leave and make some vibhuti kasat to me. And I take that, and my eyes are closed. Bhajans are finished, Aarti is finished, and I come out, and everybody, they're all talking. And this mom of this girl comes to me, and she starts talking in Sinhalese, and I ask her, what happened? She says, didn't you see what happened? I said, no. She says, Swami came to her and said, no chemotherapy. And, that was all it. So a lot of the time, we think that God is here to cure our illness, or God is here to grant our desires in the physical world. That in our physical world is not very relevant to us. And until we realize that, we're missing the ball. In the Rig Veda, they talk about this. It says, if you close your eyes, if you have no faith, if you close your eyes, it doesn't mean that reality is not there. It only means your experience of reality is not there. So if I close my eyes, it doesn't mean he's not there, but my experience of him is lost, the visual experience. God is there, divine is there, my connection with divine is there. Those are immutable facts. But by closing my eyes, I lose the experience of that divine. And so that faith in that connection is more important than anything in this world. Just not worth it. I'll stop here. Sai Ram.
Thank you, Doctor. As you know, he flew in last night. I am sure it's only his love for Swami that allowed him to visit our center here today. If we can express our collective gratitude.